Welcome to CTLE's Tech Tip Tuesday. I already remind you about it being recorded, and it will be available on CTLE's YouTube channel, which I will have a link at the end of the presentation that you can go to it if you need it. My name is Gina DiBattista, and I will have my co-presenter with me, who is David Fromhart. And our topic of conversation for today is going to be image use in D2L Creator Plus. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. So some considerations that you want to take into mind when you're bringing in images or using images in Creator Plus is image size, the resolution, and the quality. Those are definitely things you want to focus on, whatever images that you are bringing in, even if it's an image of a graph or some type of chart that you want to show. Google search images are definitely not the best option. So I would be, stay clear of those as much as you possibly can. You also want to pay attention to the file format and the dimensions, which we'll discuss on a couple more slides. So the image size, resolution, and quality really matters. Different Creator Plus elements have vary in different types of maximum widths for the images and what you're using. If you don't know what the pixel is, the PX stands for pixel, and that is a web design and development, which is the unit of measure that's used to define the size of an element, such as the fonts, the images, the layouts, and dimensions that are on the screen. And it's the smallest unit of digital image or display, which is controlled, and its size can vary depending on the resolution and the screen. But you definitely want to make sure that you have the proper pixel, because that'll alter blurriness, clearness. It could disrupt how the image is represented on the screen. So you definitely want to pay attention to that. So in D2L Creator Plus, they do give pixel size options for you for each of the pages that you're going to use. If you decide to use an accordion, the tabs one, there's two different sizes there for some of the tabs that you can use: the click and reveals, the callouts, the timeline, and the flip cards. So if you want to take notes, or like I said, this will be available that you can take and just kind of like jot these down. And when you're sizing these images, definitely consider the intended display location and the size, and size them accordingly. So D2L actually scales pretty decently, so they kind of take care of some of that behind the scenes work for you. But you definitely want to make sure that you're saving your images at least 1.5 to 2 times the recommended intended display size. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the images. And of course, if you have any questions, Austin, just go ahead and butt in. All right, and then a continuation of it is that most of the elements can accommodate either a square, a landscape, or a portrait orientation. But there are recommendations that Creator Plus has. Tab tiles work best with square images. Flip cards are great for portraits and square images, especially when you're using like multiple cards. And single flip can use landscape, and just more intended for that for flip. All right. And then there's also recommendations for the image file size of around 1024 pixels. So 1024 is how I say it, but so 1024 pixels. That's a good size to keep in mind when you are, if you're saving a file, if you're creating something outside, you're familiar, I don't know your familiarity with like actually creating images, but if you do, that would be something to keep in mind. It's a good balance between the quality and the quick loading time, which is really important. So larger files, are going to obviously take longer, and smaller. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping that in mind when you're doing that. And then the resolution of the image is also important. For web-based objects, 72 DPI, which is dots per inch. Are you familiar with dots per inch and what exactly that is? Okay, so dots per inch, and DPI stands for dots per inch, and that's also a unit of measurement. It's usually used for printing and display screens, but it also indicates the individual dots that can fit into 1-inch square. So that's how many dots will make up the image for digital and for like, the pixels and everything. So all all you're seeing is really dots, but they're put together and it makes the image. So it's very interesting. So a higher DPI obviously means that our image is going to be a lot sharper, more dots packed into that little square. So that's why when we talk about, the sizes, it matters. But in web development design, like you can have 300, 150, 172, 72. So 72 is pretty acceptable for when it comes to web-based. So if you have 72, that's great. Always keep that in mind. It's a good size to have. So that's pretty much what DPI is, but just to give you a little background and know that if you see 72, you're good. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So file formatting and placing is also important and going to be very important in D2L.
I
The
just
creator.
wanted to, can I mention one thing real quick? On the 72 DPI, that's if you're if you have the image, the size that you need or a little above, and you compress it down to like a smaller image, then 72 will work. What you don't want to do is have something 72 DPI, and if it's like an inch big, you don't want to blow it up to 5 inches because then that exact DPI is actually a lot less because as you blow up those pixels, then that's when you get the blurred edges and distortions. So just
Yeah,
keep that in mind. Like if you're at 72 DPI, you want to be approximate to the size that you're using it. And it's really not good for printing. So if you're wanting to print out some kind of like a flyer or anything like that, typically you need at least a minimum of 300 DPI on most printers in order to get a sharp edge so that it's not all blurred out. That's all I wanted to say.
perfect. Good tip to throw in there. Thank you, Dave. So the file format and the placing in Creator Plus is also going to be something that you're going to want to pay attention to. The use of layouts and the formats next to different elements like the accordions, the tabs, the callouts, depending on where exactly you want your image to display next to the content that you're using. They recommend for tabs, embedded images in the content selection using the HTML editor, which when you're in there, you'll see the editor part of it and you'll be able to navigate for that. The same with the timelines, but consider the width difference between the left align and alternating styles and when adding the images in there. So if there's something on the right, the left, just make sure that with the context and the size of the image, it's kind of like balancing and working together so it's not like thrown off, So if you have content here, but your image is here, you just want to make sure that it's aligning with the content, the image and the content is correlating together. And then if you're saving images outside of D2L, if you're not the Creator Plus, if you're not using, because they do have a library there that you can choose from and that you can bring in. But if there's a specific image, especially if it's an art image, if there's a chart or a graph, you do want to make sure that you're saving in the proper file format. So best for web, is JPEGs, PNGs, and the GIFs because they work pretty well with the uploading for those files. So if you are doing that, just make sure you file save and choose one of those. Myself, I always use either a JPEG or a PNG. That's just, what I do. There's 3 graphic designers on here, so we're used to that part of it. And I think they might agree with me. I don't know, but that's what I use. I use GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs the most. Any questions, Austin, so far?
I just wanted to jump in one more time real quick. The PNG, typically if you have an image and it's got like, and you want it to be the exact shape and it's got like a transparency behind it, then you want to use a PNG. JPEG won't do that. It'll flatten the image and rasterize it, so you'll get a white box. Sometimes you'll see that on images where there'll be an image and you'll see like a white box around it. You're like, why is that white box there? That's usually because it's saved in the wrong format. You can usually find, if it's like a line art type image, you can usually find those that are already transparent, and you just got to save it in the right file format and it'll maintain that transparency. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Did
Did you?
did-
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's actually helpful, Dave, because that's happened to me before. I have images for a class or something. I've got this white background. Like, what is that? So now I know that if I just resave the file, that might fix the issue. I appreciate that.
Well, it's not just resaving. If the image, if your native image is a JPEG and it's got a white border around it, you'd actually have to take it into an application like even Paint or something like that, or Photoshop, and then you have to. There's a couple things you got to do before you can delete that background out. So what you'd have to do is whenever it comes into, say, Photoshop initially, it'll be you'll see a layer, it'll say background, and it'll be italicized. You have to double click that background and create an actual layer. And then when you do that, you can use like the magic wand tool or whatever, select that white area and then just delete it. And then you'll notice in the background, instead of having a white background, it'll now have a checkerboard pattern. And that checkerboard is what represents a transparency. So once you have that, then you can save that image as a PNG. And then it'll maintain that transparency. Now, if the native image doesn't have that transparency, just changing it from a JPEG to a PNG isn't going to solve your problem. You're going to have to do some manipulation to it. Typically, if you have say it's a like lettering or something like that, or some kind of line art that you would typically see, like a vector art, that you would typically see that's created with Illustrator or something. Um, that you can also use an EPS to create a ping. And that'll maintain transparency because the EPS maintains transparency as well. It gets a little in the weeds, but just so you know, just changing it from a JPEG to a ping isn't going to solve the problem unless it already has that transparency.
So we'll go ahead and get into uploading and the editing part, which Dave made some really great suggestions on how to do it. I mean, I know that there's a ton of different editing tools out there. If you don't have, what we probably consider the best with Photoshop, I know that there's other things out there, and there's a lot of luckily now with having AI and some of these programs, a lot of them will actually remove backgrounds for you and kind of help out. So if there's things that you can work with to manipulate the photo to make it the best quality, definitely do that to help you out the best way that you can. But like I said, D2L has the image catalog in there. I know Creator Plus. I haven't explored it myself, so I don't know the types that Creator Plus actually has, but I do know that they have an image library that you could use to bring in, so you can explore that too. And you can actually edit some in there, I believe. From what I read, you can edit an inserted image and you can select it and then click the edit icon and you can do the options there to manipulate it to your best, what you see best fit for what your needs are. And then there's also some basic image editing options available with cropping, resizing, and adjusting the brightness in there too. So it's limited what you can do in there, but you can do a little bit of touching up in there if need be for your image. But I mean, like I said, it's limited. Don't expect like the best, but it's definitely something that if you need to crop it or if it's not quite right, you can do it within Creator Plus, having that option for editing. And then these are just some examples, which I'm sure everybody has seen. I don't know how clear it's showing on your screen, but the one to the left is just, it's very pixelated. It's blurry looking. It's just poor quality versus the one on the right, which is a really nice sharp image, which is very clear and precise for the presentation of the image. So just so you know the difference, I think nowadays everybody can clearly tell a difference, but I go back to the suggestions of not going to Google and just like Googling and grabbing because you're more than likely going to get a really poor quality image versus something that's a little bit, better. So I just wanted to point that out so people can really understand the difference between the two. Um, and then just good image placement is always something to consider when you're building your pages. The one on the left is just a nice size image that is just an overall explanation, visual explanation of the content underneath it. And it has a nice heading on top of it. And of course, this can be switched around another way. It can go to the left side, it can go to the right side. And then the one next to it on the right is just a full page HTML with the content and just a nice banner image at the top, which you can clearly do. And I'm sure you've seen that. And then having the content underneath it. So image placement, I would say, is definitely important when you're trying to visually show and capture your content. So make sure that it's not overlapping, it's not touching your text, it's clearly represented, all that good stuff, to just know that it's a good quality image to represent your content. And then when the student is looking at it, they can visually see that it represents what's going on the page. So I think oftentimes we may not necessarily focus on image placement, but it's definitely important, especially for the focal point of what you're trying to get across to the students. So in conclusion of everybody, of all of this for everybody, if you follow these guidelines, if you effectively use these images, you can really enhance your learning content for your students, have optimal displays and good loading performance. So it'll work really well. But I just want to say thank you for participating in today's Tech Tip Tuesday. And I hope that you learned something and can go back to creating and have some good, useful tips. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there will be is being recorded, and there's the YouTube channel there. And we can chat that to you, of course, if you need it. But I do want to ask if you have any other questions, or if there's anything that you come to mind, or if Dave or anybody else has something that they would like to chime in on.
I think I'm good. I think we covered it pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, thanks, Gina, Dave. Now, as someone who is starting to develop online courses, this is really helpful for me as a faculty member to think about, uploading images, quality of image, pixels. I learned a lot. I think it's going to help me in the future. I appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Even if it's a short presentation with getting into like the real weeds of the stuff that Dave was talking to is definitely a different thing that I don't necessarily think that an hour will even take to kind of explain all of that. But if you aren't using it, but to understand what it takes to have the good quality image, and just make sure that when you are using them, you're using a proper image. And there's nothing more, like distracting than like a not good image, and the students would be like, what is he even trying to show me? So having something that's really nice and representative for the visual part of it is super important. So I'm glad that you got some tips today. Please feel free to reach out to Dave or I, and we can definitely help you if you come into a slump of anything. But we appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, and to add to that real quick, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That goes just as well when you have a distorted picture, and they're like,
Right.
What does that say about what kind of content you're presenting, So it's always a good idea to have a nice, clear, photo that also represents whatever topic that you're trying to get over to the student. And they can be very helpful, and as long as they're clear and used properly, they can add a lot to a course.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree.
Gina and David, this was excellent. I really enjoyed it. It was very informative, and I have a photo background, so like seeing all of that put together, you guys put it together really well. So thank you. It was a great refresher for me. And I also wanted to say, Austin, thank you for coming. I did drop our survey into the chat, so thank you for attending, and we value your feedback. So if you want to take a few minutes to fill out that survey, we would greatly appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Candace.